Thank you, Mr. Shuman Rahman, for inviting me here. I'm not used to this kind of panels too much. So I decided to write up something instead of speaking extempore. But let me begin with an observation which everyone knows. The first casualty of war is the truth. And I look at these disinformation campaigns. It's not just a South Asian phenomenon, as you all know. So there is something like what you might call a temperate war. Cold war followed by a temperate war, which leads to a hot war. So we are in this intermediate, you can say, tropical zone of warfare. If we look at it, and then I see the signature of Shuman Rahman in the very title, Nomadic Narratives. He has a book called Migration of Metaphors. So narration, what I would like to add, I corroborate the findings, is that there are some sedentary, even I would say settler narratives too, which have been persistent throughout known history. During the War of Liberation in Bangladesh, you probably recall, Roshan Ara. Roshan Ara was a girl or woman, imagined, who laid down her life in front of Pakistani tanks in the first days of the Operation Searchlight. And a certain journalist called Bikas Chaudhry in Tripura fabricated this story. And it was taken up by newspapers in Calcutta. And throughout India, there were Roshan Ara brigades, even Aruna Asaf Ali led those brigades. The whole myth was never debunked. So during the wars on both sides, people spread such rumors, and they become almost part of history. They come out of nothing, but they do affect people. So I would like to begin with this light-hearted story. What happened in the recent events, 2 months ago exactly. For 3 days, I was the chief advisor in the media. So let me begin with this. I nearly made it to the chief advisor's office on that fateful day, August 5th. Just an hour or two after the news broke that Sheikh Hasina had fled for her bare life, I received a flood of congratulatory texts and messages, calls also. I could hardly believe my fate when I saw the news in the Hindu, the globally respected Indian newspaper, which I used to follow. The story spread like wildfire across the Indian media, but it portrayed me with all the labels I would despise. Anti-Indian, closely aligned with Jamaat, connected with the army, and you imagine the rest. And this was spread in all languages, including Ahomiya, Hindi, Urdu, and many others. I'm not a media monger, but my nephew who lives in Canada used to collect those news and keep sending me those. I enjoyed it for at least 2 days. Number two, after hearing and reading the summary of this research that has been presented by Suman and his colleague Rahul, Nomadic Narratives, I'm sure you all understand why the Indian media seemed eager to position me as a successor to Sheikh Hasina. Their portrayal reflected not just a misunderstanding of my political stance, which is known by a few people, but laid an underlying narrative they wished to project bare. Well, my hopes were shattered very soon, and my nerves cooled down when this man, who was supposed to be here, Mr. Nahid Islam, announced not me, but Professor Muhammad Yunus as their first and the last choice for the top position of the new government. So what followed were even worse. In the next few days, rumors on Facebook and YouTube fueled speculation that I might still land on a spot on the advisory board. Perhaps a significant one. But all my hopes, stoked by these phantasms, should I say digital phantasms, were crushed when the official advisors were finally sworn in on the evening of August 8th. So I was 3 days in a great tension. Now, to come to an example shared by Mr. Qadruddin Shishir, fact-check editor, AFP, who is likely present in this audience, I do not know. Yesterday, that is Saturday, he posted on Facebook, the good old daily Anandabajar Putrika recently portrayed Mr. Mahfuz Alam, Special Assistant to the Chief Advisor Muhammad Yunus, as, quote, a leader of the militant organization Hizb ut-Tahrir, I unquote. Citing a Facebook post by Ms. Taslima Nasreen. Today, Taslima Nasreen shared a photo card from the Anandabajar Putrika which claimed Mahfuz as a leader of the banned outfit Hizb ut-Tahrir. What makes it worse, Shishir concludes, even for Taslima Nasreen, the source of this quote-unquote information is now Anandabajar. This is a common tactic used in the production and spread of misinformation. You quote each other. Now, this woman, writer, Ms. Taslima Nasreen, published a book in 1992-93 called Lajja, which had been translated in millions of copies in many Indian languages, including Oriya language. Nandini Shatpati, and former chief minister, he also participated in the translation work. And why it was so eagerly taken up by Indian media. Almost in all railway bookstall you would find Taslima Nasreen's Lajja hanging. Why? Because this is also a job of misinformation. So anyway, misinformation can be, Shishir concludes, even for Taslima Nasreen, the source of this information is now Anandabajar. Anandabajar quotes her, she quotes Anandabajar. Misinformation can be state-sponsored too, often portraying a skewed narrative of development and democracy, which the Hasina regime had been particularly adept in this regard. A notable example is Muhammad A. Arafat, whom I later came to know as Muhammad Ali Arafat, who during his unexpectedly brief term elevated the art of disinformation to new Himal, South Asian heights. His strategic dissemination of misleading narratives, you all know, earned him the unofficial title of Minister of Disinformation. And one Mr. Hassan Mahmood excelled him actually before him, but he was less humorous. So misinformation can masquerade as virtue too. Awami League and its undisputed leader, Sheikh Hasina, are often portrayed in Indian narratives as a protector of communal harmony, a guardian of the rights of the Hindus, Buddhists, and other national minorities in Bangladesh. This idealized narrative, however, contrasts with the recent reality on the ground. Let me give you an example. Mr. Rana Das Gupta, General Secretary of the Bangladesh Hindu, Buddhist, and Christian Unity Council, disputed this portrayal in a post-editorial in the Ajker Putrika on October 19, 2021, saying, I quote, after the Awami League assumed power, we had adopted sectarian violence would cease. Contrary to our expectations, these attacks are not only persisted, but increased after 2011, unquote. So, before I conclude, history and politics have long been dominant themes for misinformation in the subcontinent. Misinformation has been perpetuated not only through online platforms, but also through traditional mediums like books, academic circles, and even Bollywood, needless to say, often serving specific political or ideological interests. I will give you two branches. One, for Indian scholars as well as Bollywood films, the 1971 War of Liberation of Bangladesh is often portrayed as merely an India-Pakistan war. Same is done from the Pakistani side as well. So what gets lost between the cup and the lips is the participation of the Bangladeshis in this war. In Pakistan and some Arab countries, the war crimes trials in Bangladesh had been framed as unjust executions of quote-unquote Muslim leaders. disregarding the context of their involvement in the 1971 genocide. Or you might call them, they don't even call them genocide, but atrocities. Let it be that way. So what I would like to add here is that beyond these nomadic narratives, there is something settler, something sedentary, which is persistent throughout history. If we multiply the examples, and probably what your findings are only confirming, I'm sorry to say, our prejudices. We always knew this, but you are just reconfirming it. What is the new discovery? The new discovery is old, as a matter of fact. To take another example from the Anandabazar, Anandabazar was launched in 1921 when Mahatma Gandhi launched the non-violent, non-cooperation movement, and he collaborated with the pre-launched Khilafat movement. And Gandhi was taken, that naked fakir was taken to the Shahi Jame Masjid in Delhi to deliver a khutbah. So this unprecedented event of Hindu-Muslim unity not only threatened the British regime, but it also threatened the vested interest in Indian politics. So what happened? Anandabazar was launched in 1921. And in 1933, their magazine weekly, Desh, was also launched. If you take the history of this period, which will corroborate the story you told, and the newspaper thrived on fueling communal riots. It is not only Jugantar. There were two parties at the time of the partition of Bengal and anti-partition movement, Jugantar and Anushilon, but Anandabazar was their culmination. It was the organization of the former terrorists, and they were deadly against Hindu-Muslim unity. So when Chittaranjan Das, C.R. Das died in 1925, and the riots started spreading throughout Bengal and also throughout the landscape of India. The Noakhali events of 1946 is only a follow-up of Calcutta riots, in which, by official count, 20,000 was the smallest number of casualty by any estimate. So what happened? I will give you an episode and I'll close with that. Because I happen to be associated with poetry, let me give you two instances from two poets, and then I will conclude. One is the poet Josimuddin. In his autobiography, Jibon Katha, Josimuddin writes of an event when, or another book, Thakurbadi Rangina, it may be in one of those, I will have to fact check, but it is in either of these books. He says that one day he went to, in 1933, he went to Anandabazar office where Acharya Narendra Dev, father of Nabanita Debson, professor, later National Professor of India, Suniti Kumar Chatterjee, who was also Josimuddin's direct teacher, they were just conversing, were having an adda. Josim was going there to hand over a copy of his just published book, Sojon Badiar Ghat, Gypsy Wharf, for review. Then he overheard some of the conversation gossip they were making, say that a poet called Josim has written a communal book. What is a communal book? Well, he has made a Hindu woman marry a Muslim boy. Sojon Badiar Ghat, Shaju, and then Rupa. So that's like his other earlier book, published 4 years earlier, Naqsh Katarmat, had the same kind of story. Then when Josim entered, all of a sudden they stopped the conversation. Josim then asked us, "Sir, what have you been discussing? Why did you stop?" "Well, no, we are just discussing literature." Josim said, "No, I have overheard everything you have said. Please show me one instance where this book has a communal tone." He was referring to Narendra Dev and Suniti Kumar Chatterjee. This is in 1933. In 1930s, if you now still go through the Anandabazar files, you will see that every other day there will be a heading. When there were a love affair between a Hindu and a Muslim case, they will say that, Muslims, the story of love jihad was actually discussed then. Muslims are taking away all Hindu women, eloping with them. Next event, let me tell you, is that the great poet, after Josimuddin, there are many other great good poets in West Bengal. One was Samar Sen, grandson of Dinesh Chandra Sen. Samar Sen was working as an assistant editor of Anandabazar in the early 1950s. They regularly used to spread misinformation about communal riots in East Bengal, the newly created province. So once Anandabazar asked him to give a headline to a news, যে পদ্মার ইলিশের মাথায় ইলিশের পেটে হিন্দু মহিলার কাঠা মাথা পাওয়া গেছে. So how do you know that is the Hindu Mahila? Because there is sindoor on her forehead. He denied. He said that I cannot. He refused to print it. He had to resign from Anandabazar. And if you can read about this story in his autobiography, Babu Brittanto, and so on and so forth. The Babu's Tale, it is also translated into English by that name. So I would like to simply add this, that the disinformation campaign that is now rampant due to technological factors had always been present there philosophically, ideologically. So how to cope with this? All your recommendations are very nice, but I'm professionally skeptical. Whether they will work, I'm not sure. Thank you very much, and I wish you good luck. Let me add one line in corroboration of what Mr. Ravik says. Republic Bangla is in India. It's 6 million subscribers in YouTube. On August 5th, 2024, morning or early afternoon, they get the headline, Bangladeshe hingshay nihoto 2 Sanatani. Then description, Bangladesher hingshay nihoto 2 Sanatani, Bangladesher hingshay akranto Hindura, নিহত 2 সনাতনী, একাধিক এলাকায় হিন্দুদের ঘর ও দোকান ভাঙচুর, অগ্নিসংযোগ, ভারতীয়দের বাংলাদেশে না যাওয়ার নির্দেশ, সতর্কবার্তা জারি বিদেশ মন্ত্রকের, বাংলাদেশি প্রবাসীদের সতর্ক থাকার পরামর্শ, সব আপডেট দেখুন এক্সক্লুসিভ রিপাবলিকে. দিস ইজ ওয়ান. অ্যানাদার, জামাত ইসলামী, দ্য অ্যাঙ্কর সেজ, জামাত ইসলামী নিষিদ্ধ হওয়ার পর থেকে ফের অগ্নিগর্ভ বাংলাদেশ, হাসিনা সরকারের পদত্যাগের দাবিতে প্রতিবাদ আন্দোলনকারীদের. This was the kind of language they were using. But this is not new, as I said. We have to add one important dimension. The way we have framed that there are 7 or 8 nations in South Asia as if they are all equal. I think some are more equal than others. That you probably did not focus on distinguishing. But I would like to suggest, and any kind of recommendation, that you have to distinguish between unequal partners in this game of, let us call it temperate warfare. Power is unequal, and therefore effects are also unequal. And let's take one example. We often speak without distinguishing between nations and their powers. Our sovereignty is limited. There are sovereignties of freedom from and freedom to. Ours are freedom from kind of sovereignty, not freedom to. So this was a historical experience. Let me add this for 30 seconds. Japan's historical experience proves that in 1930s, a little earlier also, Japan was clamoring for Asian unity. But what Japan did on China proves the hollowness of it. A recently published book by Mr. Sugata Bose, it's called, I was reading this morning, Asia After Europe, just published by Harvard University Press this year. He has a paragraph here. It says that this way, the Japanese promise of Asia for Asiatics during World War II was self-serving in the extreme, but not merely an empty slogan. The undermining of British, Dutch, French, and American colonial rule quickened the pace of anti-colonial nationalisms across South and Southeast Asia and brought Asian freedom movements in closer contact with one another. This is the positive side of Japanese slogan. What is the negative side? The sense of Asian solidarity evinced by the colonized as the battle for freedom was real and keenly felt. So much, so good. At the same time, the ferocity of Japanese aggression against the Chinese exposed the hollowness of the rhetoric proclaiming Asian brotherhood. The defeat of Japan in 1945 did not negate the advances made by colonized Asian subjects on the road to freedom from Western rule. I think in our relationship with India, we must emphasize this unequalness of relationship, of power. I mean, the kind of disinformation campaign going on in Indian media now, even old Indian ambassadors serving in Bangladesh, the way they are speaking clearly betrays a colonial mentality. They take Bangladesh as their turf, they have lost it, and they condemn the uprising of Bangladesh as simply as an anti-Hindu riot and uprising. This is very surprising and sad. I think we must have the guts to say the truth. This is a kind of despicable treatment of one's neighbors. And when you assume that all neighbors are equal, probably you are veering away from the truth. Thank you. Yeah, let me add one point. An example of distortion, which we have not focused on clearly. There has been a discussion going on in this country about Rabindranath Tagore's opposition to the establishment of Dhaka University. Now, Ramesh Chandra Majumdar, R.C. Majumdar, wrote in his autobiography, published in 1978, that the what you call upper class Hindus of Dhaka and Calcutta jointly opposed the establishment of Dhaka University. They protested. Now, in recent media, I found a rumor in my name that Salimullah Khan said Rabindranath Tagore signed a memorandum 17 times. But actually, it was signed by Raj Bihari Ghosh and Ananda Chandra Rai and underscored by Ashutosh Mukherjee and many others. 250 upper-class Hindu leaders from Dhaka actually signed memorandum given to Lord Hardinge not to establish a university in Dhaka. And they continued this not only till the establishment of the university in 1921, but until 1947, when they were members of the university court. Senate was called court at that time. They continued to inveigh against the university. This is written by no one less than Ramesh Chandra Majumdar, who was the fourth vice chancellor of Dhaka University. Jibone Sriti Dipe is his book. Now, nowhere he mentions Rabindranath Tagore's name. In fact, in 1926, 5 years after the establishment of the university, Tagore was invited as a guest and he addressed the Dhaka University audience. Everybody knows this. But how come it comes in the media saying that because you have to change the national anthem, which is written by Rabindranath Tagore, so you have to vilify him? Tagore opposed the establishment of Dhaka University, and therefore a song written by him cannot claim to remain or be the national anthem of Bangladesh. National anthems get changed, we know, historically. But the ground they give is based on a distortion. Thank you.